Hello, what's up guys, Medium Guy here, and in this video we're going to deploy an image proxy, which is a caching and resizing image proxy which is written in Go, and we're going to see how to deploy it as a Docker container. So without any delay, let's get down to work. So as you can see right over here, I'm in the official GitHub repository for the image proxy, which is developed and maintained by Will Norris, and it is a totally Dockerized application. So actually, as you can see right over here, you can achieve several things by making use of this tool, things like resizing and cropping and rotation, which actually works dynamically on the fly, and actually the clients make requests to this service, passing it their desired options, and on the fly this service will try to apply those options and return the images as desired. So over here you can see the URL structure that you should actually make requests to this service, which we'll see shortly in this video. And I'll move down. Right over here you can see some examples that you can actually achieve by passing these options given right over here. So like for example, you can define your desired image size in pixels or as a percentage, or like for example, if you want to rotate, you can pass it like this, and you can also manipulate the quality of the images that will be returned to your clients. Also on the fly you can change the image format to your desired format, and if I move a little bit more down right over here, you can see that you can also achieve smart cropping as shown in these two pictures. So if you just crop the image without passing the smart crop option, the image proxy service will just crop from the center or starting from the point that you pass to it. But as you can see right over here, if you pass in the smart crop option, it will just crop the object and select it, again resizing to your desired options. So enough talking, and let's move to VS Code right over here. And as you can see, I've got some files and configurations prepared in order to show how this service will work, which I'll put all these files and configurations in my GitHub repository, for which you can find the relevant link down in the description section of this video. So as you can see right over here in the Docker Compose file, we've got three different services. One is Nginx, the other one the image proxy itself, and the last one is the min.io, which is an object storage, and actually you can store and grab files from it. So later we're going to see how to configure the caching to image proxy to actually cache the images in the min.io object storage, eventually for better performance. So right over here on the Nginx section, which is the service that I'm going to use in order to serve my static files as a static server. So if you already have your service which is serving your images, or you're using some external services and any other solutions, you won't actually need this Nginx service. But in order to show how the image proxy will work, I actually needed some services to serve my images statically as a web server. So I'm just using the official Nginx image, and over here I'm mounting the nginx.conf file to this exact path inside the container that will be created, which is exactly the file that the Nginx service will try to configure itself when it's coming up. And based on our configurations inside this file, Nginx will try to serve as our desired state. Next over here I'm mounting the ./files directory to this exact path inside the container, which is the directory that I'll put my static images inside it. And later we'll see in the nginx.conf file, I'll try to configure the Nginx to serve those files, those images inside this ./files directory. And over here on the port section, I'm actually mapping port 80 of my host machine to port 80 inside the container, so that the Nginx service will be exposed on the port 80 of my host machine. So because the images will be proxied behind this image proxy service right over here, you can actually remove this part if you don't want to directly expose your Nginx service to the outside network. So next I'll move right over here. You can see that I'm using the official image proxy image, and I'm mapping the port 8080 to exact same port inside the container, also exposing the image proxy that will be running inside the container to the network of my host machine. Next, right over here on the environment variable section, I'm passing the username and password or the access key and secret key for my Mini.io service, and as a result, this image proxy service will be able to connect to Mini.io service and store its cache files. And the thing that I'm doing right over here, I'm passing some external arguments to the command that will be run by default in this image proxy image. It's just getting weird pronouncing image proxy image. So as you can see, I'm passing in the binding address of the image proxy service, and I'm binding it to the 00 IP and 8080 port, which is the exact same port that I exposed out of the container. And lastly, right over here, I'm passing the -cache argument, and I'm passing the exact address of my Mini.io service, passing it with these two options right over here. So I'm setting the disable SSL to 1, and because I'm using Mini.io, which will use the path style in its S3 API, again I'm passing it to 1 to enable that option. So if you are using some S3 API that is not using path style and actually it is using subdomain style, you don't actually need to pass this option right over here. So I'll move back to the repository right over here on the README section, which I highly recommend if you want to go deeper in this, to actually give this a visit and try to configure this based on your use cases. So I'll move to the caching section right over here. You can see that we've got multiple options in order to configure the caching. We can pass the memory, which will cache in the runtime of the image proxy service, or we can pass the directory option and mount some directory from outside the container, and the image proxy service will use that directory in order to store its caching files. Or as you can see, we can pass the S3 option as the caching mechanism and passing the endpoint and disable SSL, or force the path style, and based on our S3 API, we can configure the image proxy to store its caching files in a S3 API provider. So I'll move back right over here on the Mini.io section. You can see that I'm using the official Mini.io image and exposing some ports to the host machine's network. And again, because only the image proxy service will try to connect to this Mini.io service, you can actually disable the port section right over here in order to prevent exposing the Mini.io service directly to the host machine's IP address. Or just if you have some other S3 API service, or you're not using the S3 as your caching mechanism, you can just remove this service and pass in your S3 API credentials and address to the image proxy right over here. So right over here on the environment variable section, you can see that I'm passing the exact same credentials that I passed in the image proxy service. So as I'm expecting, the image proxy should be able to successfully connect to this Mini.io service right over here. So next I'll try to move to the nginx.conf file, and right over here you can see that I've got some basic Nginx configuration file in order to expose the /files path and serve this exact path inside the container as an alias to the /files path. So whatever files that exists in the ./files directory will be served as a web server with the Nginx using this exact configurations right over here. So lastly, I'll move to the files directory, and you can see that I've got two sample images, which I'll try to use the image proxy service to manipulate these two images and see how that actually works. So with having all this in mind, I'll try to move to the terminal right over here, and if I hit ls to make sure I'm in the exact same directory that I've got my configuration files, and by saying docker compose op-d, I'll expect a network to be created plus my 3 containers attaching to that exact network. So if I say docker compose ps, I should be able to see my 3 containers in op status, also mapping the exact ports that I defined in my docker compose file. Also, if I say docker compose logs-f to follow the logs, and --tail 100 to grab the latest 100 lines of the outputted logs of these 3 containers, I'll hit enter, and as you can see, things are looking good. Image proxy is listening on the exact same IPN port that we defined in its command. Nginx is also ready to accept connections, and MinIO is also available on the given ports. So I'll move to the browser right over here. You can see that in the address of my host machine on its port 80, which I exposed the Nginx service on the /files and the name of the first image. I've got my first image right over here, and on the image2.jpg path, you can see that I've got my second file served from the Nginx service. So right now, if I go to the port 8080 and pass in my options, and lastly pass in my address of the image that is being exposed, you can see that I can actually manipulate the returning image from the imageproxy service. So as we saw right over here on the examples section on the GitHub repository, I'm actually passing in the smart cropping option with some height and width, and right over here, if I remove the smart cropping option and again make a request, you can see that the smart cropping is not applied and the object is moved a little bit to the right. Also for the image 1, I can actually make a request to the imageproxy port, pass in some height and width right over here, and using the R with a degree to rotate my returning image and pass in the address of the actual image that is reachable by imageproxy service. So as you can see, I'm using the Nginx as the address of the Nginx service, and because the imageproxy service is attached to the same Docker network that we just created, it will be able to connect to the Nginx service using its Docker Compose service name. So instead of this name, I could also pass in the real address of the Nginx on port 80, and again if I hit enter, you can see that it is also reachable from the imageproxy service. So basically this part right over here is the real address of your image that is exposed and reachable from the imageproxy service. So that's all for this video. I hope you learned something new in this one. Of course, I recommend you give a visit to this GitHub repository right over here and read through its README file in order to go deeper in this service and try to configure it based on your use cases. So if you haven't watched my other videos, I recommend you give a visit to my channel where you can find videos about other cool tools. And if you found the video useful, please don't forget to give a like and subscribe to my channel, which will help grow the channel and motivate me to create more free contents like this. So with that, that's all for this video, and I hope to see you in the next videos.